So this is a video from SireK0zy, which is somebody you've watched on the channel before. The last video we watched from them was the history of Dead Hard, which is obviously, you know, the perk everybody wants to always talk about until the end of time, and I'm kind of getting sick of talking about it at this point. But luckily, this has nothing to do with that. This is somebody you've watched before, but as always, make sure you support the official release of the video by clicking that link I just posted in the Twitch chat, or clicking the link in the description below to subscribe and like to them, because this is not our content, this is somebody else's content, so you support them bringing that entertainment to us and making this content possible. So this one, they're talking about how Legion almost killed Dead by Daylight, which is a video I've reacted to at least one video talking about how Legion used to be, which is used to be one of the most frustrating and awful killers of the game. Thankfully, I did not play the game during this time period, because the things I have watched back, the things I have seen and heard of, frightened me deeply, and I don't know how they thought this was a good thing to have in the game. Thankfully, nowadays, Legion is in a pretty alright spot. He's still not really fun to play against, because it really is just holding M1 after every time he mends, or every time he deep wounds you, and then you just mend. It's like Mend Simulator. But like, you know, playing as him is fun, because you get to go for like the 5th hit down and chain your hits, and their add-ons are pretty fun. So like, I think they're in a pretty alright spot. Like, I feel they're in an alright spot. They're not an egregiously entertaining killer, but they're alright, especially compared to the nightmare we're about to witness. So yeah.
Legion is a very unique case among killers. He's like Dead Hard. You either absolutely love him or you hate him to the point where you'd rather go versus the basement Bubba 5 times in a row. He was introduced in the game on the 18th of December 2018 in the patch 2.4.0, and ever since then he has been one of the most popular characters in Dead by Daylight. And I can understand why, because the amount of variety Legion brought to the game was simply mind-blowing. Playing him, killers no longer felt like they were limited to a couple of basic mechanics such as walking, showing your leg through windows, and occasionally hitting M1. With Legion, they could also run and fast vault windows and palace just like survivors. But it wasn't just that, because while running, or if we're gonna use the game terminology using Feral Frenzy, you were granted the ability to track survivors through the so-called killer instinct. And if you manage to hit them before your power runs out, you injure them, and on top of that give them the deep wound status effect. It works just like a normal injury, but with one exception: you have limited time to get rid of it, or else you will go down. By today's standards, it's a pretty common thing. You get deep wound every time you use perks like Dead Hard or Off the Record, or simply the killer hits you right after you've been unhooked and your base kit endurance is still active. Back in the day, this mechanic was exclusive to Legion, and this certainly helped him earn more coolness points in the eyes of the community. Ironically, it also made Legion one of the most controversial killers in the game, but we're gonna talk about it later. Another thing that made Legion popular was the fact that it was not one but 4 killers, or should I say 4 characters as one killer, because basically Legion is a gang of bloodthirsty teens which ended up in the entity's realm. Yeah, because like, customization is so important. Customization is so important to Dead by Daylight, to the point where like players won't play certain characters because they don't have a lot of cosmetics in the game. So not only could you completely customize your character, your Legion, you could be one of 4 different Legion characters entirely. So not only could I could be like, I'm a Julie Joey kind of person. So where somebody else may be like a Frank Susie person, and they have their own special little cosmetic setups for Frank and Susie, I'm more a Julie Joey kind of person. So I have my own unique setups for those 2 characters, because those 2 are my favorite Legion. So even Legion player to Legion player, you have completely different cosmetic setups and opinions and feelings about like even the individual 4 characters that are in there. There's so much depth there that it's like, it's just easy to get into, you know? Some gameplay behavior made it possible to switch between all 4 gang members by equipping their designated cosmetics. Sadly though, it doesn't change much about the killer, except for their voiceover, but it was enough to make half of the community start simping for Legion. And that was absolutely insane considering how super weak he was at the release. For starters, his default movement speed was only 4.4 meters per second, and his terror radius was 24 meters, which basically made him Trickster, except for he was M1 and therefore perfect perfect looping material. I guess the idea was that it would be able to compensate for it with how fast he was while using his power, and that's why originally Legion had increased running and vaulting speed during Feral Frenzy. But spoilers, it didn't work. In fact, the entire concept of the old Legion would soon prove to be a giant failure, and the reason for this was Legion's original base kit. To begin with, he couldn't automatically down survivors after 4 successful frenzy hits, regardless of their health state. So the only intended use of his power was to keep survivors in an endless healing loop by quickly running from one guy to another. At least that's how it was supposed to work on paper, because in reality his default power duration was only 6 seconds, which is 4 seconds shorter than in the current version. And on some maps it was barely enough to reach the next survivor before your power ran out. What made it worse was the fact that the first iteration of Legion didn't speed up with every successful frenzy hit like today. In other words, your only chance to get some value from your power was to find a group of survivors sitting close to each other and pray that after you give them deep wound, they will actually attempt to heal back to full health. Because this way they give you a ton of extra time which you can use for snowballing the match. However, soon survivors realized that healing versus Legion was absolutely pointless, because first, why waste time on something that will be cancelled with just a press of AM2? And second, most of Legion players would leave you immediately after giving you deep wound anyway, and in this case, it doesn't even matter if you're healed or not. At some point, Legion games became so predictable, survivors literally stopped trying to run away. Instead, they would get on the gen, wait for the killer to find them, proudly take a hit, and immediately start mending while...
They still do this. This is still a problem that this character has in 2023. This is still a problem this character has in 2023. People still do this. They're just like, just hit me. Just hit me. I'll just start mending. It's time for your mending, honey. Yes, dear. Yes, dear, I'll mend now. Like, it is still something this character has in 2023. It's so... it's people's main complaint about the character. Like it's what people's main, like I brought up, it's like it's a mend simulator. People don't like just holding M1 and standing there. They already have to do that on the gen, so now they have to do that while after being hit. And with a hit, that's almost guaranteed. Not the most interesting thing in the world.
Watching the killer leave. And once they were done, they didn't even need to go anywhere because they were still right by the generator. Once again, the new killer was countered by Gen Rush. Seeing how playing Legion this way didn't really benefit them, killers did a 180 and tried using
Legion has a higher kill rate because he has 5th hit down. It has nothing to do with this, in my opinion. It's the 5th hit down that raised their kill rate. They literally have an insta-down ability now. I get what you're saying, that, like, you know, smart legions will punish people for doing this, but that was always a thing? Like, you could always punish them for just mending in your face.
Chases
and he's already gone.
Surprisingly, they had just the tools for this. For example, it turned out that the release Legion had the ability to reduce survivors' deep wound timer by 10 seconds with each consecutive hit during the Feral Frenzy, without using any add-ons. And like that wasn't enough, old Legion could literally spam his power mid-chase, because his full power recharge used to take him only 15 seconds, and it didn't even have to wait till the power gauge filled completely. All he needed was to make sure he's got at least some charges back, and then he could use his Feral Frenzy again, which meant more inevitable hits and quicker depletion over your deep wound timer.
You're right.
And it's not
like I know we made it as a meme, but Ace is right. This really is kind of like very similar gameplay to the Trickster, except not effective. Like that's literally like Trickster gameplay. It's just pelt you with knives till you eventually die, and it's just kind of up to like where you were positioned on the map to make that successful or not a thing.
Something you could do to prevent him from giving you 28 stab wounds in a row. Because for some reason, the devs thought it was a good idea to give him 0 punishment for missed attacks while using his power. So even if, let's say, you baited a pallet or window and made him swing, it wouldn't cancel his power, and he would still catch up with you in just a matter of seconds and still get that 1 extra hit. Losing him was not so much an option either, because on top of being able to see your exact location through Killer Instinct, old Feral Frenzy allowed Legion to see blood from injured survivors on the floor. And just to make the image of the old Legion complete, how about I tell you that up until patch 3.4.0, Legion's attacks during Feral Frenzy were considered basic attacks. And this means that Frenzy hits used to give them the full benefit of the perks that had basic attack as their trigger condition. Gosh, what a great time that was. If I had to describe this playstyle with just one word,
what was wrong with his head?
Be annoying. But again,
what just happened?
If I had to
look
describe
at his head snap when he vaults this.
Playstyle.
What? What is happening over there? What's wrong with his head? What's wrong with his head? What's going on, man? Oh, a bad day. Oh man, that's an understatement. Oh man, what is wrong with his neck? Never touched Legion? Yeah, I didn't buy it because it gave you that unfair advantage for a while because it wasn't clear he was in Frenzy. But I might go back and get it now that they fixed it.
With just one word, it would probably be annoying. But again, I don't want to give you the false impression that old Legion was strong. If anything, it was quite the opposite, because no matter how broken his original base kit might look, downing survivors still took him a gazillion years, let alone actually sending them back to the lobby screen. And while he was busy chasing down that one poor bastard who was unlucky enough to spawn close to him, the rest of the survivors had all the time in the world to fix the gens even on the next map. By the end of the PDB, it became clear that Legion was going to be a problem. And for many survivors, including myself, it was starting to look like a very disturbing tendency. I mean, we still had PTSD from old Freddy, and instead of learning from their mistakes, the devs basically gave us
he raises his knife now when he chases.
The backlash was absolutely insane. And today's behavior would probably react pretty quickly and change the most broken aspects of the new killer before releasing them on the live servers. But it was the dark times of Dead by Daylight where it didn't matter how much you cried about a problem on Twitter. In most cases, it still wouldn't be fixed, and the new patch was gonna hit the live servers almost unchanged.
Which was bad.
They didn't even bother to give him a basic quality of life update before dropping the new DLC. So during his early months, he couldn't do a lot of simple things which are now considered standard. Like, for example, you couldn't search lockers while using your power. You couldn't see blood and scratch marks during fatigue.
I was kind of saying, yeah, like how dare we want our game to actually be nice and fruitful? Like, yeah, us, right? We're a bunch of heads. I hate that mentality. Anybody who has that mentality is asshole. No, we should always push for dumb things in the game to be fixed. I hate this mentality of like, oh my god, we should never complain about anything. We should be so grateful that Behavior gave us anything. How do you think this shit gets fixed? We go, hey, this shit should probably be fixed, and then they try to fix it. Just don't self-report issues ever, because, you know, screw you if you're a whiny baby. Hate that mentality. It makes you sound like such a when you say shit like that. Hate it.
Survivors or manually canceling your power used to fully deplete the power meter, and it would only start recovering after fatigue and not after you actually stopped using it. But the worst thing the devs kept from the PDB was that the deep wound timer started regressing as soon as the survivor broke the chase. And it didn't even matter if they were still inside of the terror radius, running, or even mending. Once the game thought the killer was not chasing you anymore, your death countdown started. It might not sound like that big of a deal on the surface, but in reality, this is what made old Legion go from being a fairly annoying experience to downright Jesus Christ behavior. Fix this shit. The thing is that this feature essentially allowed Legion to down survivors without directly chasing them. All they had to do was land the first hit through Feral Frenzy, let the survivor run away so that the chase stops and their deep wound timer starts decreasing, and then simply follow the scratch marks without getting too close. This way the chase never starts again and the deep wound timer keeps depleting, but at the same time the survivor doesn't have enough time to mend because they have to keep running, and after a while they will just go down. In fact, Legions didn't even have to wait till the deep wound timer ended completely. Back then, mending took survivors about 15 seconds, and knowing that, Legions could simply wait until the deep wound timer of their target was depleted to roughly 80% and then just go for someone else. Because at that point the first survivor was already doomed. They had about 10 seconds of the timer left, which was simply not enough to mend, and all they could do was just to watch their character die. And don't forget, the chase mechanic in old DBD was janky as hell.
Yeah, but don't complain about it on Twitter, else you're a baby. Don't complain about that on Twitter, else you're a baby. I am the superior moral high ground. Hee
For example, the game could easily trigger a chase even if the killer and survivor were literally on different floors. And in order to end the chase, the killer sometimes didn't even have to stop. They could just look away and count to 3, and in most cases that was enough. You probably already realize where I'm going with this, but if not, let me break it down for you. By looking away and following survivors backwards, old Legion could break the chase almost instantly, and provided that the survivor he was following had deep wound, Oh well, you already know what that means. Back in the day, it was such a common quote-unquote tech among Legion mains. I've had that happen to me like 3,000 times. It didn't always work, cause like I said, the chase mechanic was kinda inconsistent, but the mere existence of this exploit made me wanna uninstall DBD.
Yep.
And trust me, I was not the only survivor who felt that way. And the devs heard our
But yeah, you know, it's okay. It's just, you're just a whiny baby on Twitter if you ask for things to be changed.
complaints, and they actually reacted by reworking Legion. It's just it happened in half a year, but yeah, I mean, old behavior, what can I say? Though technically, the first changes to Legion came out 1 month after his release. Patch 2.5.0, manually cancelling Feral Frenzy no longer depletes the power gauge, and the blurred visual effects during Feral Frenzy are not that intense. I don't have any problems with the latter, because I get it that super blurred vision can be a little distracting to killers, but why give Legion more control over his power when there is an
I played a Visage and I liked it, but like some of the chapters were really rough. Like the grandma chapter where we went from doing like 1 or 2 puzzles a chapter to like 12 or 14 in one chapter. It was just like kind of yucky. Most of the game was good though.
Obvious exploit that needs fixing is beyond my recognition, I guess to make exploiting much easier. During this time, Behavior realized how much of a mess their new killer was, and in the spring 2018 they attempted to rectify it by giving us patch 2.7.0, which reworked most of the Legion base kit. The deep wound exploit was finally not a thing anymore. To get rid of it, they increased the Legion's terror radius to 32 meters and made it so that the deep wound timer stops if the survivor is in the terror radius. Pretty good change, but what really made the community happy was that the devs rebalanced Legion's power so that it was less viable for tunneling, but was more useful for map control and pressuring all 4 survivors. Also, you could no longer activate Frenzy when it was only partially recharged, and the full recharge time went from 15 seconds to 20 seconds, while the fatigue duration increased from 3 to 4. So no mid-chase ability spam anymore. But the best part was that Behavior actually made it impossible to reduce the deep wound timer with additional frenzy hits. Or should I say, remove the base kit ability, cause until patch 5.7.0 it was still possible when using Frank's mixtape. But it wasn't as bad as before, cause it's a purple add-on and not everyone brought it. In return for all these nerfs, Legion received the increased Feral Frenzy duration of 10 seconds and the increased default movement speed of 4.6 meters.
I feel like people definitely brought it. You guys who played back then, they definitely brought it, didn't they? Yeah, people definitely brought it, right? Yeah. So why? Revisionist history is interesting, isn't it? We found that out the hard way. The hard way through so many different things that, like, scarcity of add-ons is not people not bringing the add-ons. People will definitely always bring the add-ons. They'll blackboard it if they have to.
Per second. This allowed him to
how did they switch to flashlight scope? That's so toxic. The way they're not going to be doing gems. Yeah, you really needed to punish them.
Less of a pushover and loot.
You really punish him. You get him, big boy.
Lockers during Feral Frenzy, and successful attacks outside of his power no longer depleted his power gauge completely. Instead, they would reduce its charges by 50% of the total. And yeah, I do understand that it's still a buff, and it's kind of stupid to complain about it, especially after so many years. But I genuinely think that punishing Legion for his M1 in any shape or form was blasphemy, and Behavior should have removed this mechanic right after the PDB, but I guess it was a step in the right direction. The only change in this patch I will never understand is that for some reason they decided to make Legion slower while using his power. From now on, his running speed in Frenzy was only 5 meters per second, his pallet vaulting speed was 1.1 second, and window vaulting was 135. Not that these micro tweaks changed much, it's just last time I checked, his movement and vaulting speed was not really what made him broken, and later Behavior will indirectly admit it by reverting these nerfs. But that's not gonna happen soon, and meanwhile what we had was the classic version of Legion. A killer with some interesting and unusual mechanics, which unfortunately were not that strong to help him get high in the tier list. Normally when such killers join the roster, they sink into oblivion mere days.
Remember when Scott John swore this was the weakest killer in the game for a while? But that was like the hill he wanted to die on. Was that like old Trapper, Burger King Myers in the game, by the way, still stuff like that. Legion was the weakest character in the game. You remember that? That was a weird time. That was a weird hill to die on. I do not think they were the weakest character in the game, even in this form.
is after the release. Look, for example, at the Knight and the Skull Merchant. But somehow with Legion it was not the case, because no matter what behavior did to him, his fan base was growing by the day. And honestly, I think the only logical explanation for this is that the community was horny for him. Because I mean, of course they were horny. That's the DBD community.
Why does the community care about this so much? There was a React video we scrapped last week because it was just essentially a video about somebody ranting for like 12 straight minutes about how the horniness of DBD like bothered them, and it was the most like 80, like they sounded like an 80-year-old congressman. They sounded like my mom scolding me. Like, who cares? Why do people give a shit about this? You sound so incelly when you bitch about this. I'm not saying that's what they're doing, but it's just weird that they bring it up. Yeah, that isn't unique to DB. That's the internet. Have you lived under a rock your whole life? Like, why are people so, oh no, people are sexually attracted to things? Who cares? Why do you give a shit so much? Like, to me, like, this may be mean. I'm sorry. Whenever I hear somebody get on a soapbox about the community so horny for this, that sounds to me like somebody who does not get a lot of horny in their real life. That's what that sounds like to me. That sounds like somebody in their real life. There's not a whole lot of not safe for work stuff happening in their real life, so they don't like not safe for work stuff happening in their games. That's what it sounds like to me. That's the vibe it gives off. Just does. Just does.
Community after all. And don't get me wrong, the ever-increasing number of Legion mains wouldn't be a problem, it's just his new version was, how do I best put it, not very chase intense. And by that I mean that after the rework, an average Legion main would rather die than commit to one survivor for longer than 3 seconds. Instead, their goal was to keep everyone mending and therefore make the match drag on forever. This playstyle became especially popular when people realized that Legion power formed a very convenient synergy with the recently reworked Sloppy Butcher. Before, it used to make injured survivors bleed more frequently, and after patch 2.1.0, it also made them mangled, which slowed down their healing by 20%. Of course, this version of Legion didn't feel as miserable to go against as before. Hell, he even wasn't that hard to counter, just do gens instead of healing. But it wasn't the question of strength, but more like the question of having to sit in one game for 20 plus minutes because the guy on the other end decided to kill you with...
Gee, who does that right? Which character does that right now and makes the game so miserable that people are DCing left and right and wanting the character to be completely reworked? Who makes games almost twice to 3 times the length of a normal match, installs out games to win while also being kind of weak at their base kit? Wow, what? Chris 3-Genner, good old Dole Merchant. Wow. Crazy. That's wow. It's like we've been here before, huh? That's the showcase. It was funny. I've talked about this before, but I think it's funny because one of the main proclamations that were supposed to come out of that video was that you don't need to 3-gen with Skull Merchant to win. But in the moment of, or in the opening moments of that match, that they put drones over 3-gens, and I'm just like, wait a minute. I'm like, wait a minute. Thought you said. I thought you said this isn't what you needed to win. Good night, Tess. I appreciate you. 3-gen. It's not 3-gen. It's patrolling. I'm not holding the 3-gen, so it's not a 3-gen. I'm just applying pressure to 3 generators at the same time, which is totally different than holding a 3-gen. If I was holding it, I'd be staying near it. Just putting the drones over and passively pressuring them is different than holding a 3-gen. It's kind of like tapping. It's tapping a 3-gen. It's pointing at the 3-gen. It's not holding it. I'm just touching it. I'm just touching the 3-gen. Like, yeah, I'm not holding it. It's just totally there to fall back on in case the M1 killer thing doesn't work out. It's different. Come on.
Boredom by making you mend 13 times per minute. This time behavior took
Gently
even
caressing
longer
the
to
two
come
gen,
up
yeah.
with a solution for this. The next set of changes came out 8 months after the first rework. Patch 3.4.0 was released on the 3rd of December 2019. To make it so that playing versus Legion doesn't feel like being kept hostage anymore, the devs made mending faster. 12 seconds for self-mending and 8 seconds when being mended by your teammate. Next, they closed the last breach that allowed using Feral Frenzy for downing survivors and made the deep wound timer stop regressing if the survivor was running or mending. And last but not least, frenzy hits were no longer considered basic attacks, which destroyed its synergy with a whole bunch of perks. But the funniest thing about this patch was that the devs actually reverted all the speed nerfs during Feral Frenzy introduced in the previous update. Now Legion's running speed was 5.2 meters per second, which is comparable to 5.28 he used to have before the nerf. And the vaulting speed for both windows and pallets was back to 0.9 second. And that's classic behavior. They got so scared all Legion would kill their game, they started nerfing even the things that were never broken. But I mean, at least they realized their mistake eventually. Over the course of the next 2 years, Legion didn't see too many changes. I guess behavior were fairly satisfied with him, so overall there were only 2 patches with minor balance tweaks and quality of life improvements. April 28, 2020, patch 3.7.0 added the ability to see blood and scratch marks during fatigue and polished Legion's vaulting animation during Feral Frenzy. February 9, 2021, patch 4.4.0 reduced the timer of deep wound from 30 to 20 seconds so that survivors feel more pressure and can't ignore their deep wound for too long. Roughly during this period, behavior started actively updating their game, which along with the improved graphics and map redesigns also included the reworks of older killers who struggled to keep up with their newer counterparts. By the beginning of 2020, Legion was considered one of those killers, and that meant that things for him were about to change. The patch that made Legion the way we know him today came out on the 28th of April 2022, and boy oh boy was that a huge leap for him. The most important thing was that now his every successful frenzy attack would speed him up by 0.2 meters per second up to the maximum of 0.8 meters per second. Combined with the default frenzy speed, in the best scenario he could run at the speed of 6 meters per second. And there was a reason for stacking up the speed bonus, cause now after 4 successful frenzy hits, the next frenzy attack would put the survivor into the dying state, regardless if they were healthy, injured, or even had deep wounds.
Which actually added something fun to play.
Where I went against the buff
it's actually
Legion
fun to play
for the first time without reading the patch notes, and let's say I was a little surprised. Next, they finally got rid of the stupid mechanic that used to punish Legion for using his M1. From now on, his power gauge doesn't reduce anymore when he hits someone with a basic attack. Using the power has become more forgiving in general, cause since this update, when Feral Frenzy ends, the power starts recharging immediately rather than after fatigue. And the fatigue duration was reverted back from 4 to 3 seconds. Yet another
people run double, run the fucking the dirt and shit just to have that. People were lamenting that back in the day. They were like, I want my stun duration gone. Like, people hated that. People avoided the stun duration like the plague. That was like the Legion main community making complaints like, brother, please lower my stun. I'm tired of running add-ons. So funny.
Behavior overreact and nerf things that were absolutely fine. Most of the Legion's add-ons were reworked in this patch, and he even received 2 brand new ones. The biggest change in this regard was the fact that Frank's mixtape no longer decreased the deep wound timer, and instead it speeded up gen kicking and destroying pallets and breakable walls.
Really nice.
This add-on was the last thing reminiscent of the former Legion, and now that it was reworked, old Legion was gone for good. But look on the bright side, because in exchange we got a pretty awesome metal tune as the Legion's new chase music. Really, and the best thing about it is that it's actually customizable by using different mixtape add-ons. Here's how it works. Each mixtape add-on unlocks a unique layer that adds upon the already existing chase music, and these layers can be mixed with each other if you equip different combinations of these add-ons. Overall, there's 5 different mixtape add-ons, which means that you can get 16 different chase music variations. Here are some examples.
So good. It's so good. It's so good. Go listen to this forever. Oh, it goes so hard. I wish SireK0zy's was better so I could use it more.
And it's not just a cosmetic thing, cause now if you listen closely during the chase, the music can actually give you some ideas about the build Legion is running. So far, behavior seems to be done with Legion. He's in a pretty good spot. Some people like him, some hate him, but that can be said about any killer really. However, with the recent nerfs to medkits and healing in general, sloppy butcher Legions will start dominating public games again. And if that happens, damn, I'm afraid they're gonna have to nerf his vaulting speed again.
Yeah, in terms of Legion, in terms of good old Legion, like I said at the beginning of the video, I feel like they're finally in a good place for the most part. There's little stuff like Ace said, like never sleep pills can be kind of boring, but that's not the most, that's like the biggest thing about them is that they're not fun to face, but they're not bad as much as they're just boring, you know? Like I'm definitely more annoyed facing other killers in the game. I'm just bored fighting a Legion most of the time. It's just because you spend so much time mending and doing nothing, which is kind of just baked into the character at this point. You best start liking my YouTube videos. You're in one. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, it's just like that there's not really a way to spice them up without just giving them a different power. So I feel like this is like the best it's gonna get, unfortunately, for the survivor side of things. For the killer side of things, they're pretty fun to play now. Just because like I was mentioning, like going for the 5th hit down is hype. Like when you actually get that 4th hit and you're like struggling to find another guy and you barely make it, that feels good. Just kidding, that's fun. I like that. It's a good time. It's legitimately a good time. It's legitimately a good time, and I do like doing it. If they could somehow find a way to make them more interactive on the survivor side, they'd probably be perfect. Probably perfect. Yeah, Legion over Duel Merchant any day, legitimately. Like, if they could just find them a way to make them a little bit more interactive on the survivor side, they would literally be in the most perfect spot they could be. They're not too strong. They're like a middle of the pack killer. They're not too OP, but they're not too weak, which is a great place from a balance perspective. It's really just down to the interactivity. So if they do that, if they somehow find a way to make it a little bit more interactive on the survivor side, facing Legion, really Legion is like a perfect killer at that point, right? Perfectly balanced killer and perfectly designed killer if they could just make him a little bit more interactive on the survivor side, because that's kind of like the big glaring remaining final issue with Legion. Is just like it's just men simulator. Even when they've adjusted the men timer so many times, it really is just, especially with never sleep pills, you're just kind of just holding M1 a bunch. Because you already have to hold M1 on the gen for 90 seconds. They have to hold M1 on yourself. And you gotta hold M1 on the gen. It's just like you're devolving most of the game into a singular button, which is not very riveting. You can get that same effect of a mobile game, and this is not a mobile game. Well, it is now. A different version of the game is a mobile game, but like I'm talking more like cookie clicker and dumb stuff like that, like dumb, very uninteractive games that are just mostly there just for brain food and not because they're actually like interactive at all. Yeah, like Toto just said, like from the killer's perspective, they're pretty much fine. There's not really much to do. There's nothing you really can do to them, because if you make things stronger, they start becoming like kind of annoying. If you make them weaker, obviously that makes people not want to play them. So from a balance perspective, I think they're pretty perfect. You just got to make them a little bit more interactive. A little bit more interactive from the survivor side, and then they're great. And they're good. And then you know, Match Puzzle 92 is an interactive, genuine game now. Especially if those games have microtransactions. They're definitely not real games. Especially if those games have microtransactions, they are not real games. Yeah, I think Legion's fine. I just think that they need something that makes them fun to play against. Like I don't know if it's like something to do, like changing the way like Deep Wounds as an interaction works. Just something to do with Deep Wounds that isn't just like taking a timeout or making the timeout interesting. Like I think a perfect example of this is like one of the few things that actually I do enjoy about Skull Merchant is taking down the drones is a minigame, right? It's the little, you know, repeat to me this it's like a repeat to me thing, or it's repeat to me the sequence. If they can do something like that with like mending, where they make it a little mini game, so it's actually like doing something and not just like standing there and hitting one button. Like, that'd be great. Turn that into some sort of minigame. That'd be my suggestion. Yeah, I think that would be good. Yeah, I think that's the only thing I would actually change about the character. It's called holding on. That's not a minigame. That's a singular button. A singular button. It needs to be like something interactive, something to do. They're 3-hour matches? Yeah. Got like pig boxes? Yeah, at least pig boxes have skill checks and stuff to do, right? That's another good example. At least pigs boxes have skill checks, so it's not like you just standing there doing nothing. Something to add, like, make it a little bit more interactive. Something to make it a little bit more interactive.